Today's event, Global Britain Local Story, brings together, as you're going to see, speakers from a multitude of different backgrounds to discuss the importance of locality and identity on their practice. The V&A holds the UK's national collection of textiles and fashion, one of the most important collections of dress in the world, and a centre of inspiration for designers everywhere. Our collections comprise over 75,000 objects, and we're continuing to develop it all the time through both historic acquisitions and exciting new contemporary objects which reflect some of the most pressing issues faced by the fashion industry. But those of you who are from fashion houses here today, it would be nice if you let us win at some of the auctions that happen as we try and build up our collection. The V&A also has an international reputation for our wonderful fashion program, including our sellout exhibitions, Christian Dior, Designer of Dreams, our Mary Quant exhibition, and the really exciting Fashion in Motion series of live catwalk shows. We're always striving to improve public access to our rich and important collections of fashion and textiles, and to engage with the latest discussions and debates surrounding this important industry. Earlier this year, we welcomed the Fashion Revolution Question Time to the V&A, a high-profile annual event normally held in the Houses of Parliament, but held here. We've also had the Environmental Audit Select Committee have public meetings here. And crucially, what we think is that our exhibition programme has addressed some of the big issues around fashion and sustainability, and it's great that we have Edwina Ehrman here, who is the curator of Fashion from Nature, which really traced through 500 years of history the inspiration of the fashion industry from the natural world, but then also the impact of fashion on sustainability and ecology today. And that exhibition, interestingly, is now on at the Natural History Museum in Denmark, where they want to think about that interrelationship between fashion and sustainability. One last thing before I hand over. We're thinking very carefully now about the future of our fashion galleries. Gallery 40, which is a wonderful part of this museum. It's the second most visited space after the Jewellery Gallery within the V&A. But it's feeling a little bit tired, and we are going to invest in it over the coming years. And we want to transform the stories we tell there into a global story of fashion, which is why we're working across the museum, not just in our furniture, textiles and fashion department, but from all parts of the museum, to think about how we tell a much more global story of fashion for the increasingly global audiences who come to the museum. So in the coming months and years, we might well be drawing upon your expertise and knowledge to help with that conversation. I'm now going to hand over to Tamara Ginnick, founder and CEO of Fashion Roundtable, the secretariat, i.e. doing all the work, to the all-party parliamentary group for textiles and fashion, to introduce the session and welcome today's keynote speakers. But I just want to reiterate how privileged we feel to have such talent within the museum today, and to know that this is your museum. All of this belongs to all of you. We only succeed because of the work and the partnerships we do with the creative brilliance that you produce. So we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm a bit nervous, so bear with me. Thank you very much to Dr. Tristan Hunt, Leanne, Edwina and everyone at the V&A for hosting the first of the events of the all-party parliamentary group. It's called APPG for Speed, of Textiles and Fashion, of which Fashion Roundtable are the secretariat. We launched Fashion Roundtable 18 months ago, so this is very exciting for us. And the APPG was dormant, and basically I lobbied to reboot it because I felt that the sector has so much cultural and creative value, and that wasn't being communicated in Parliament, especially during these interesting times. So, Global Britain Local Stories it was an idea I came up with for the title when I met Leanne. It's an idea that's very close to my heart. I think in these quite polarised times, it's a fantastic opportunity to celebrate what inclusion and what representation mean to the culture and the country and the value that they've added, not only creative and cultural, but also economic. So to put that into context, fashion is the largest component of the creative sector. The sector is growing at 4 times the rates of other sectors in the UK economy. Fashion makes more than cars, it makes more than pharmaceuticals, and where we are in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, of course, makes more than the entire UK fishing industry. So I think it's interesting to put that into context. The APPG for Textiles and Fashion is chaired by Dr. Lisa Cameron. Some of her team members are here. She's hoping to get here later, but because of the aforementioned constitutional interesting times that we're in today, she's has been delayed by a vote in Parliament, and we hope to see her later. What we've done with the APPG is very much celebrate the value of the sector. So we've had events around visas, trying to advocate for the industry to be added to the shortage occupation visa list. We've also done events on IP, as well as Commonwealth fashion, British fashion, and really celebrating the opportunities through Brexit and beyond that the industry can have if it's well understood by parliamentarians. We also celebrate the work that Tristan is lobbying with the STEAM education agenda that he's putting forward with the V&A. It's something that when I worked in Parliament for Sharon Hodgson, I was part of the Secretariat for the APPG for Art, Craft and Design and Education, and that's very much central to our education remit at Fashion Roundtable. So I think that's a very important message that we support, because from education into domicile talent, we can therefore make sure that we have an inclusive and productive fashion industry going forwards. I'm now going to introduce Dame Eleanor Laing. She's one of the vice chairs of the APPG. She's deputy speaker, and despite the constitutional crisis happening in Westminster, she's made it here, and I think that's fantastic and a great endorsement of the work of the APPG. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to be here at the V&A, which is full of colour and hope and interest and calm people who are all getting on with their own jobs rather than be in the House of Commons this afternoon. I'm afraid that I start with an apology on behalf of my colleagues, and particularly on behalf of Lisa Cameron, who is chairman of the APPG, as Tamara has just said, and Kelly Tolhurst, who is the Minister for Small Businesses, because there is a vital vote about to take place in the House of Commons. And people say, well, surely you must know when the vote is. If the vote's going to be at 2 o'clock, you can get to the V&A and you can get back by 1:30. That'll be fine. Or if the vote's going to be at 11:45, then you can arrive late at the V&A and it'll all be fine. We don't know when the vote is going to take place exactly, because it depends how long the previous statement and the previous debate take. And that depends how long people speak for. Believe me, I am not making this up. Tristan knows, he lived through it for many years. We can't tell exactly when it's going to happen because we just don't know how long people will speak for. And if any of you have watched any of the Brexit debates, well, no, perhaps you haven't. If anyone has watched any of our debates, you will know that there are people who are very exercised about this subject, and that they might well hold the floor for a long time. So I'm afraid that I am the sole parliamentary representative here. And the reason for that is not that I'm in dereliction of my duties in Parliament, but because as Deputy Speaker, I am paired with the other Deputy Speaker, Rosie Winterton, who would actually have loved to be here because she cares far more about fashion than most things as well. She and I are effectively paired with one another, therefore we don't have to exercise a vote, and therefore I can be here. And I am so pleased to be part of this initiative. And what the Fashion Roundtable is doing is just great. because people who don't stop to think about it would naturally assume that fashion and textiles is rather a trivial subject. Perhaps it's the sort of thing that women pay attention to or art students pay attention to. How wrong they are. It isn't just mainstream, it is vitally important. Someone said long, long ago, and it's become a truism, that fools make fashions, but wise men follow them. And if you look at our history of fashion, which, of course, you often allow us to enjoy here at the V&A, you can see social history in fashion and in pictures. You can see economic history in the textiles we use and the way in which manufacturing occurs. You can see the economic cycle. And I remember it being explained to me long ago that when a country is doing well, then dresses are long because there's plenty of material. When a country is in economic difficulties, dresses are short because there's less material. But you know, it's true. It's true. It's so much more fun to talk about economics and economic history if you relate it to fashion. But my point is that the work that all of you do is far from being trivial. And indeed, I am sure that if Kelly Tolhurst, the Minister for Small Businesses, had been able to be here this afternoon, she would have told you that fashion and the fashion industries at the moment account for more than £10 billion a year to our economy. In the absence of my colleagues, I will risk giving you a few other statistics and facts which I merely want to draw to your attention to illustrate my main point, which is that fashion and textiles and all that goes, design and entrepreneurship and all that goes with them, are important and are seen to be important to the government and to Parliament. The Department of International Trade, for example, actively supports companies throughout the United Kingdom. I'm sure many of you are aware of this, in order to promote fashion sector exports. In 2018, fashion, footwear, and textiles exports totaled £11.5 billion. That's a really good statistic because it's actually an increase of 2% on the 2017 figure. So if people tell you things are slowing down in Britain, no, they are not. In your sector, things are getting better and better. And the fashion industry directly contributed £32.3 billion to UK GDP in 2017, which again was a very significant increase from the previous year of 5.4%. The economy isn't growing at anything like 5.4%, but the fashion industry and its ancillary branches is growing at that record amount. And we have to remember the employment created by this part of the economy. The Department of International Trade reckons that something like 890,000 jobs are supported across the country by the fashion industry. Now, you see, I'm a politician, so I wouldn't have told you 890,000. I'd just say it's nearly 1 million, because nearly 1 million sounds better. Stick in your mind 1 million jobs in your sector, which is desperately important. And the textiles sector, of course, goes far beyond just fashion, being diverse and occupying an important position in the supply chains of many UK industries, including, of course, the automotive industry, construction, aerospace, and medical industries. And it currently comprises a number of subsectors broadly categorized into textiles, wearing apparel, and footwear. We mustn't forget footwear. Ladies and gentlemen, we mustn't forget footwear, ever. And it is estimated that textiles in that way account for 4% of UK manufacturing output. That is really important, far from trivial, an absolutely key part of our economic performance at present. In 2019 to 20, British companies have been supported across 35 international sector events via the Trade Show Access Programme, which the Department for International Trade operates. And of the grants, altogether, all the grants that have been given to try to boost exports by the Department of International Trade, do you know 14.24% of the overall were in the British Footwear Association and the UK fashion and textiles industries. We've just about had enough of statistics, but let me just tell you in passing that the British Fashion Council received £170,000 of Department of International Trade funding to support the 4 London Fashion Weeks and 4 missions for emerging designers to Paris Fashion Week to maximise designers' export potential. Are any of you involved in those sort of areas? Yep, I see a bit of recognition. You know far more about it than I do. I hope that you'd say that this has been helpful to you. I'm not getting a response. Because it's not. Okay, we'll come back to that. I'm glad I'm not the minister. If I was the minister, I'd have to take that up with you. Maybe we can discuss it later. I've done enough on statistics, which I wouldn't have done if you had Kelly Tolhurst here. Because my reason for being here today is because of my support for the all-party parliamentary group on fashion and textiles, which I have to say I didn't know existed until Lisa Cameron happened to mention it to me about a year ago. And my first involvement with the group, I will admit, was coming to the Dior exhibition. And having paid attention to all that the group then was doing, I want to give it as much support as I can because I appreciate just how important it is to have connections between the fashion and textile industries, the arts, which are thus involved and here through the V&A, and the economy and politics. Now, you are very fortunate here at the V&A in having Tristram Hunt. We lost Tristram from the House of Commons and you gained him. And I remember your valedictory speech, Tristram, when you explained why you were leaving the House of Commons to come here. And my overall feeling was, gosh, you lucky chap. Because this is a wonderful institution. And I think it's terribly important that we don't all work in silos and say, oh, the arts and the V&A do this, and people in the economy who produce textiles do this, and people who speak in the House of Commons do this. Nonsense, it doesn't work like that. It only works best if we're all working together. And your reaction, madam, to what I said about a government department being helpful, you see, I think that government department's helpful because the government minister has told me that the department is helpful. You tell me that it's not helpful. It's terribly important that we feed that information back to the minister because, contrary to popular belief, the ministers want to be helpful. And if what they're doing is not helpful to you, that's what the all-party parliamentary group is here for. And so I hope that we can have some dialogue afterwards or via the all-party group and the Fashion Roundtable via Tamara and thus through Lisa, to make sure that those who are making government policy and those who are voting for government policy are actually reflecting what you need as an industry and as an important sector of the economy and of the arts. What I want you to know from me is that in Parliament, we care. And never forget, we were talking about local aspects of the fashion industry. Never forget that Parliament is made up of 650 individual members of Parliament who, in addition to their party loyalty or formal duties, represent a constituency of their own. And every member of Parliament cares passionately about their own constituency. And therefore, we hear stories again and again about the importance, for example, the individual members of Parliament will talk about, let's say, Harris Tweed and its importance to the Highlands and Islands. Now, there is a sector of the industry which a few years ago was in the doldrums and just made jackets for old men to go fishing. Probably wasn't quite as bad as that, but that's how it seemed. And now it's a worldwide flourishing industry because somebody brought together entrepreneurship, financial input, and ideas which took a basic, excellent, brilliant quality product and turned it into something which was marketable and desirable. And likewise, I come from, although I represent the constituency of Epping Forest, which is really rather full of trees and doesn't have very much to do with this area, I was born and brought up in Paisley. And Paisley is famous the world over for the Paisley pattern. And the reason for that is that the ships coming from India came up the River Clyde and brought cotton, India and America, in the 19th century. And the greatest cotton mills in Europe are in Paisley and were the backbone of the economy of the area where I was where I was born and brought up until about 30 or 40 years ago. In the borders of Scotland, we have the best cashmere in the world. In Huddersfield, they have that special hub for the Yorkshire textiles industry. And we have Nottingham lace, we have every member of Parliament, and there are 650, as I've just said, would tell you of some important area of fashion or textiles that is represented exclusively in their area, and we care about it. I happened to be earlier this week in Rome with the UK ambassador to Italy, nothing to do with fashion. I was speaking at a conference about women in Parliament and politics. But our ambassador in Italy is a very elegant, youngish woman. That's unusual for an ambassador. And she had organized a couple of months ago at the beautiful British Embassy in Rome, which is an ancient villa that's been there since the 18th century, maybe 19th century. I wasn't paying attention to that architecture. She had organized a wonderful international fashion show. Now, we think about Italian fashion being desirable in the UK, and we think of Italian brands being among the leading brands. She turned it on its head and invited young British designers, because that's what we all want to promote, and it's really good to see such a great representation of young, innovative designers here today. She brought together young British designers to showcase what British fashion and British ideas could do in this wonderful embassy in Rome. And I was really proud when I saw the results of that, because too often we think that the leading brands come from Paris or Milan or Rome. Oh, no, they don't. We have so much to give from the UK, and we have so much to build upon, not just in exports, but here in our own country. I've been very careful today to be dressed entirely in British brands. We have L.K. Bennett, Russell and Bromley, and of course, Marks and Spencer. Isn't it good? Wherever you go in the world, almost wherever you go in the world, there's a Marks and Spencer. Because this is the basis of the importance of the industry and art form in which all of you are involved. And I'll close by simply repeating what I've just said in thanking you very much for inviting me here today. We in Parliament and politics care about what you do, appreciate what you do, and believe it or not, we want to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Dame Eleanor. It's a fantastic speech. My name is Leanne Manfredi, and I'm the team leader here at the V&A for schools and colleges. And it's been a fantastic journey over the last couple of months getting to know Tamara and the Fashion Roundtable team. And it's definitely given me a lot of food for thought. And it's already beginning to have a huge impact, really, on the way in which our programmes are being directed, not only in learning, but also across the museum. And I'm delighted as well that so many of my colleagues are here today from fashion, because we always work, and I must say this, brilliantly well together as a huge team here in the museum. It's also been a fantastic journey to meet so many of the folk that are sat on the stage today, who have been relatively new to me, not so new to colleagues across the museum, and to see such fantastic designs coming through, and to also introduce them to my team in terms of pushing the design agenda. And last week, we launched our Innovate National Challenge, which is all about supporting Key Stage 3 students in order really to kind of scaffold their work towards undertaking the D&T GCSE. So all this work that we're doing in the V&A is really pushing these agendas, and fashion is absolutely central to that debate as well. I'm not going to talk forever, but what I will flag up is please do hashtag Global Britain Local Stories, front row to front bench. You've also got speakers' biographies, which include Instagram handles, so please do have a look at those and follow them. How this section is going to work, Tolu is going to start by giving her presentation, and then can I ask each of the speakers then to look to the right and introduce the next person by first name? And we're going to work our way through that way. And then at the end, we're going to do a Q&A, which will last for about sort of 10 minutes. So we have Tolu, we have Teleica, we have Rahimur in the middle, Salma, who many of my colleagues will know here at the V&A. Welcome back. We have Vicky and we have Moses. So we'd like to start with Tolu, and I'm going to hand over to you for the first section. Thank you.
Hello, can you all hear me? Okay. Hi everyone, thank you for coming out today. Thank you to the V&A and also to Tamara from Fashion Roundtable, who does a lot of amazing things in terms of diversity and inclusion in the fashion industry. She actually was the person who invited me here to speak. So first and foremost, my name's Tolu Coker. I'm a fashion and textiles designer, illustrator and multidisciplinary artist. I am London born and bred. I was born to parents who were Nigerian immigrants. They came over here and we grew up on a council estate on which I still live with my mum and my brother. I graduated from Central St Martin's 2 years ago, and the reason I even knew about Central St Martin's was because of people within my community who made efforts to have local youth centres, to have things which gave not just access but education to people from the local community who otherwise would not know about these schools and institutions that help for the betterment of young people. So I'll start off with talking a bit about my work. My work is very hugely based around identity. I take a very multidisciplinary approach to it. So most of my collections start off as documentaries, as following people's lives over the course of a year. my graduate collection, Replica, was based on looking at what I call diaspora identity. So someone like me who was born and brought up in Britain, but has Nigerian parents, has somewhat of an identity crisis because you're not quite British and you're not quite Nigerian. And I think there's a lot of people here, also in this room, who may relate to that from your relative backgrounds. And I think it's an identity which isn't spoken about. Sometimes when we think of Africa, we kind of refer to it as a country, but it's not. It's a continent which is very diverse in people and locality. And also with Britain, when I have to kind of fill out forms, I've got to tick Black British. And I'm not quite sure what exactly that is, and I guess my work tries to unravel and address that. So one of the things I'm really passionate about is craftsmanship. A few people here have spoken today about, different industries in Yorkshire, in Huddersfield. Also, I like to look at different techniques which are local to Nigeria and different cultures and merge that with what I've learned growing up here in Britain. So screen printing, embroidery, textiles is really at the core of my work, as well as illustration. So a lot of my work does start off as illustrations, photos. The research process is very, very important for me because that's where I really get the inspiration from. And it's not about trying to create a narrative of what I think an identity is, but allowing people to tell their own stories and simply being the vice through which they communicate it. I have also worked for different fashion houses, Maison Margiela, Louis Vuitton and Celine being some of them. This is some of the work that I've created in my time there, which also highlighted to me the importance of young people within the industry as well. Interns actually create a lot of the creative ideas which you see down the runways within fashion houses, and I think it's really important that we look into that and address the importance of them and how to help them. I think even with my background that I've been privileged to have access to particular internships when several of my counterparts are very, very talented, but because of circumstance don't get to participate in those things. And that's something which I really hope that sessions like this are able to also address. Merging art with fashion as well, looking at people across sectors and kind of really championing collaboration is something which I think is very important. And this is some of the ways in which I like to merge my illustration with fashion. This is an extract for a photo from my graduate collection at Central St. Martin's. One of the things that I quite consciously do, and I think it's maybe become somewhat of a statement quite unintentionally, is having an all-black cast walk down the runway. I think it opens up a lot of conversation, some incredibly positive, some very critical. And that's something which I welcome because I think it's important that we have those conversations. I think it's important that we start to challenge the subconscious perceptions of what is Britishness, what constitutes Britishness. All the people you see in this photo are British born and bred. And when you see them come down the runway, many people have kind of said, naturally they have this feeling and thought of Africa or the Caribbean. Many of them don't relate to that identity. So that's something which I really love for us to kind of address. Again, looking at the idea of luxury within fashion, what do we consider luxury? What constitutes luxury? I think it's long been attached to wealth. A lot of the time it's long been attached to elitism. For me, when I think of luxury, I think of heritage, I think of culture, I think of story, I think of how we are able to create fashion as an indication of the times we're in. And so, again, I like to challenge that perception with my aesthetic, with how I shoot things, and with the clothing which I create. Again, well-known brand Diesel, which many of you may be familiar with, where they do a lot of denim. This was actually inspired by my mother and her experience growing up in Nigeria, but also navigating in England. And they wanted to see a project which represented England, and this was the outcome. where I guess it was actually presented in Italy, so I guess you can imagine the response. They were a bit like, what's this? And just some photos to kind of give you a bit of an indication of where the inspiration stemmed from. And it was just showing the kind of the rich cultural heritage which we have here, and also the importance of local communities, local people, and different backgrounds which make Britain the amazing place it is today. So thank you all for being here, and I pass you on to Teleica.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Leanne and Tamara, for the invitation. I am going to read. I'm sorry about that, but it's just better if I do.
CIAD is about the Costume Institute of the African Diaspora, and we're about costume and adornment and promoting costume adornment from the African diaspora.
This is Theo. Theo is a dancer, model, and capoeirista. Let me introduce you to Aisha. Aisha is our female model today. Both of the pieces of madras were bought in Jamaica, but the bluer madras is sort of a generic madras that's used throughout all of the islands. But the red, sort of the burgundy madras, is specifically Jamaican madras, and it's called bandana.
Seeing everything come to fruition, seeing the costume with somebody in it, because it was from the tartan exhibition in August, and seeing our beautiful model Aisha work the dress, it looks amazing.
So what we're about is exposing that to the younger generation so they get interested in it and they own it and can take it forward, and also exposing it to the wider community, because lots of people don't know about the richness of the culture and the expertise in fashion and adornment throughout the African diaspora.
Okay. I run an organisation called the Costume Institute of the African Diaspora, CIAD for short. CIAD started as a need that I had for a resource that didn't exist. I wanted somewhere I could access information about costume, culture, and clothing from different parts of Africa and the African diaspora. And our aim is to highlight and catalogue clothing and adornment practices from across the African diaspora in an attempt to identify how a group of people who have been largely disenfranchised and marginalised have used whatever means or materials available to establish their own sense of personhood and self-worth. It is part of our work to build bridges and create links with organisations across the world in order to build an archive of material culture that has enabled people to develop their own sense of self. When I talk about the African diaspora, a lot of people don't really understand what I mean. They kind of say, what is that? Do you mean Africa? And as soon as I mention the African diaspora, people immediately talk about Africa, which is that and isn't that at the same time. So this is why I'm reading, because it's just so much better if I just write this thing down. The African diaspora is people of African heritage who have been transplanted either through forced economic or social migration from their place of origin to their current place of residence within the last 1,000 years. That's the definition that we go by within CIAD. Often these people, in one form or another, became the machines and tools of the system that created the wealth of the West, and therefore passed their understanding of economic servitude onto their descendants. Okay, so how do we do that? At the moment, we do that largely through project-based outputs, where we work on building a body of research about certain clothing practice or cultural fabric, and then use that research to develop projects as a way of disseminating information and educating the public. We also hold workshops, speaker conferences, and do consultancy and run a regular platform called the CIAD Exchange, these are posters from the CIAD Exchange, where we share our research alongside other researchers and practitioners. Our first project was in 2014, and was entitled Tartan, Its Journey Through the African Diaspora, and detailed the previously untold story of how the tartan pattern happened to turn up on madras cloth in the Caribbean, which can be seen here in this image, and also the second from the end, that is St. Lucia national costume, which is called the wabdouillet, and the skirt is made out of madras fabric. Madras can also be seen on the Maasai, or certainly a tartan derivative could be seen on the shukas worn by the Maasai and the kilts worn by the Shembe Church in South Africa. So stories like this are based on socioeconomic political developments through military campaigns that have shaped our current society. The evidence for the legacy of this can be seen in the clothing and material culture of countries that are now part of the Commonwealth. So thinking about the current climate of hypervisibility, we thought it was important for us to make sure we acknowledge others in this field across the diaspora. We are also researching and working towards building up the knowledge of Black representation and self-identification. To that end, in May of last year, we held our first biennial dress conference where we had 11 speakers from across Europe, the US, and South Africa come into the UK. It was a really well-received event, and everyone seemed to have a really good time. We are committed to continuing the connections across the diaspora and essentially trying to make these links back across what has been called the Middle Passage, the triangular trade, and understand how people can work together with developing dress knowledge and fashion practice. I'm going to try and do a little rhythm here. Okay, so as part of our remit, it is to look into the history of fashion of African diaspora populations. We took the opportunity of the first celebration of the contribution of the UK to the UK of the Windrush generation last year to discuss the style and fashions that the Caribbean populations brought with them. I also used the opportunity to discuss my grandmother's handmade wedding dress, which is the third one from the end. That dress is from 1963. And my nan, that's what I called her. My nan arrived in the UK in 1960 and got a job in a factory. She and her husband saved up for the dress, and it cost £18, which, considering the pittance of their weekly pay, was a lot of money at the time. As I moved forward with my research, I made the understanding of the engagement of post-war Caribbean women and how they engage with their clothing and what they thought of themselves part of my PhD. As I feel it's really important not only to understand how Black people engage with their clothing, but also how people believe clothing can transcend social, cultural, and racial perceptions. Right, that, and then that. Okay. So our next project is quite ambitious and will be rolled out over a few years. It's called The Classic Art of Sustainable Fashion, and it is aimed at looking at how people in marginalized communities have used flora and fauna and reclaimed materials to dress and adorn themselves. As a lecturer, fashion historian, and cultural clothing researcher, the hidden stories that can be told through the clothing both excite and distress me. They're exciting because when you know what to look for and what you are seeing, they illuminate an existence that dispels any notions of not belonging or monoculturalism. They are equally distressing, however, because the stories remain hidden and are not common knowledge, and therefore a cycle of ignorance is continued and perpetuated. Okay, we are working towards developing ways we can get this information to young people in fun and interesting ways. One of the things we are working towards is developing an exchange, which actually our exchange program starts next year. And we're working with UAL. I teach at UAL, at London College of Fashion. And so we're taking a group of students from UAL over to the Bahamas to meet with Bahamian students. And then we're going to bring the Bahamian students back over here. So these products that you see here, as well as the armor in the previous image, that one, are all made from hand-woven Bahamian straw. This is a form of sustainable adornment that has been part of Bahamian history for hundreds of years and has financed the education of most of the people who sit in the current Bahamian government. And just to close, one of the reasons that we're doing this exchange with the Bahamas in particular is because a lot of my students talk about sustainability and want to know what they can do when they feel very distressed that they're in London, and they feel like they're in a first world country, and this thing is happening, and what can I do to help? And then because I go over to the Bahamas and I speak with students over there and our partners over there, the students over there are like, I don't care about sustainability, meh. And they are going to be impacted more by climate change and rising sea levels much quicker than we are over here. And I thought, okay, so if the students over there are not that interested in sustainability when you have things like this going on, and the students over here are really interested in sustainability when they don't have this going on, let me just mix those two students together and get you to talk to each other. Develop enterprises, talk about the shared history and all that type of thing. So yeah, that's kind of what we're doing. And then the last thing is, I've got to do a little plug, haven't I? Our next exchange is on the 26th of July at London College of Fashion, which is 20 John Princes Street. So if anybody wants to come, you're more than welcome. We've been talking about colorism and how it affects people in all different types of walks of life, within the fashion industry. And our next talk is about the prevalence of at the moment of the extremely dark-skinned fashion model. So yeah, and I will pass you on to Rahimir. Yeah, okay.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming, and thank you Tamara for inviting me. No, because it's funny to think how far Fashion Roundtable's come, because I remember at the beginning I remember coming to the talks and then being invited to go to the talk, and how far I've come in that year as well. So I think it's best to kind of start off from where I've started and about me. So I grew up in London. I grew up in East London on the Isle of Dogs to parents from Bangladesh. So my dad initially came over here when he was 11 years old in the 1970s. And obviously back then, fashion industry wasn't what it was. It was called the rag trade. And he still works in that rag trade. And he is a tailor in along Shadwell, along the highway, if anyone knows where the factories are. And my mum used to help him, and we used to have a sewing machine in our living room, and they used to like work and make their penny cash in hand, and for me it was amazing because that's when I first learned how to sew. It was watching my dad do what he does best, which is make tailoring, and it's what he still does now. So I grew up with seeing him constantly wear tailoring, and then have my mum argue with him about what is being Bangladeshi. And obviously she came over when she was 16 years old, freshly married, and never went back. So to this day she still hasn't gone back home. And that argument that happened in our house constantly about her cultural hold that she was holding on to, because obviously she came over when she was really young just because of financial need, and then my father's like obsession with like tailoring and what was like the right way of dressing, which was a very like stark contrast to how my mum wanted us. And we grew up just wearing a mishmash of everything, and my work kind of like really addresses that. And then, so growing up, and I think the education part is something I really want to kind of speak on as well. So I went to a primary school on the Isle of Dogs, and then I went to an Islamic private school because my parents thought that would be the best deal for me. And then obviously after that, I didn't last long. I literally lasted like 2 years, and then I went to a state school. And so obviously knowing that I got kicked out of school, you know that I definitely was not the best student. So I was picked up by a local arts organization called A-Team Arts, who I still work with now, and I still work with young people. And I first initially just started going there just for fun. We used to just have tea and biscuits, and I started doing textiles with them, started learning how to weave with them, and it was just fun and jokes. And then it rolled into a BTEC art and design, and then it rolled into me doing my fashion menswear course at St. Martin's. And I think that youth organization was like a massive integral part in how I changed my life, and how, especially in the area that I grew up in, Tower Hamlets, where it is predominantly South Asian. The state school that I went to, there was only one person who was something other than Bangladeshi, and that's not even South Asian, just like Bangladeshi, and that was it throughout all the years. So that's what I grew up with. And then, so the first time I went back home was just before I did the International Fashion Showcase, because I really wanted to go back and like really connect with it a lot more than I think my mother did. And I always looked at my culture through photographs and through documentation that my mum still has to this day. And so then when I went back home, for me, that was a really big eye-opening moment, because that was when, I'm not sure if a lot of people know, so in Bangladesh there's two main cities, there's one Sylhet and one Dhaka. My family are Sylheti, and they're Muslim, and they quite shun like culture, the arts, and it's like not really encouraged. So when I went to Bangladesh and I went to Dhaka, and I was just in awe of all the craft that was there, of all the poetry, all the literature, that for me it was just like a box that was just opening, and I was just like, oh my God, like for me, and I was like learning everything. So and growing up in the UK, I actually used to come to the V&A a lot, and I still do come to the V&A a lot, and I go to the archive, and I'm not sure if a lot of people, and a lot of people don't know this, the V&A have an amazing archive that all you have to do is just book, and then you can kind of see amazing textiles close up, and I do that a lot with my work. I come to the V&A, I look at the archive of pre-partition like textiles that are no longer in Bangladesh, and I think within my work I kind of address that. And for me, how I'm addressing that is by looking at the artisanal fabrics that are in archives all over the world, online, in pictures, looking at the techniques specifically, and then going back home to see how the level of that the artisans can work at. So I think a good example is in the latest collection, which I think is shown, and is this silk block print here. So I found a photograph of silk block print, and it was amazing. There was like 7 different colors on it, and it was amazing. Just like to have a textile that was so light and so fresh. And then I went back home with these images, and I was like, guys, I want to do this. I was like so excited, and then nobody could do it. And then I was like, I was there for like nearly 2 months, and I was just like really struggling. So then I'm sponsored by a group of artisans in Bangladesh, and I sat down with them, and the closest we got, and obviously this for us was like we were learning from each other. I was learning from them, they were learning from me, and this is where my degree actually really came into use, and all the youth work that I did. And we got to a 4-color block print, and for me, for both of us, it was a really proud moment, because they constantly were just like, no, this is not how we do it. We definitely can't do this. And I was like, guys, do it. And it was this constant like conversation. And so then when they first saw it come out of the water, so because it was a silk and resist, so it was boiling in water, they lifted it up, and all of us were just like, oh my God, we've just done something. And then I was like super excited. I brought it back to London, and obviously that's when I started draping and making the collection. And I think that for me, that's the bigger message. That's what I want to do with my career as a designer, is be able to say in probably about 5-10 years time that I've helped the South Asian textiles that have been lost from that whole diaspora, and I've helped bring it back up to the level that it once was. Yeah, and I'm going to pass you over to Salma.
Yeah, I just want to say first off, thanks to Leanne for the invitation. It's so nice to be back in the V&A. It's just like a home away from home. And also, it's so nice to be in discussion amongst such inspiring designers and design professionals. Just to introduce myself, I'm a contemporary art and design curator with a specialism in the Middle East. I've recently joined a foundation in London called Delphina Foundation, which provides and facilitates creative exchange for cultural practitioners in the form of residencies, exhibitions, and public programs. But prior to this, I was the Middle Eastern contemporary curator here at the V&A for about 8 years. And I think it's this experience that I'm going to draw from the perspective of globalizing a collection. So as some of you might know, the V&A's collections are divided via media. So you have fashion, textiles, and furniture. The only geographic exception to that is the Asia department, of which Middle East is a subsection. So I think in the first instance, when I first joined the V&A, and it was a new role for me, I was really thinking about how the Middle East would relate to the wider V&A collection and also public programming. And it was very important to me from the outset to really try and embed the Middle East within the museum's programming, to integrate it in a way rather than ghettoize it, and to really find for it to sit equitably amongst and alongside global counterparts, to try and craft display opportunities and ways in which to draw out stories, and in a larger global discourse. So this played out in several different forms, one of which was conferences, and I was working very closely with colleagues across the collection and across the museum. With Leanne, we hosted two study days, which was part of an existing series that the learning department had facilitated called Style Cities, which looked at kind of spotlighting cities at key moments in time. So we chose to focus on Beirut from the 50s to the 70s, which is kind of widely credited as the golden era in Lebanon's history, and an era of kind of openness and real kind of a really avant-garde moment in its time. And also in looking also at Casablanca as well. It also took the form of training programs. So last year, one of the things that we did in collaboration with the British Council was to provide a training program for 12 Gulf-based designers to come and do a 2-week intensive program at the V&A. And I think this was important both in terms of addressing the key gaps in design education in the region, as well as the lack of training opportunities, the lack of access to collections, and really to offer a program that was free. I think to really be as democratic as possible, irrespective of privilege. But I think it was also important in terms of the V&A playing a role in trying to facilitate a regional network for many of these designers who were working in the same city, and some of them in neighboring cities. They'd never worked together. So I think it was really reinstating the importance in the economy of friendship and collaboration and partnership. It also took the form of integrating the Middle East into upcoming displays and exhibitions at the museum. So we had many Middle Eastern practitioners in exhibitions like The Future Starts Here, as well as even the current exhibition, which is fantastic here at the V&A, which is The Food Bigger Than the Plate. But largely, one of the things that I wanted to look through and just show you some examples of was acquisitions. And I was really grateful to work very closely alongside curators in fashion, textiles, and furniture, who really provided their expertise in terms of the understanding of materials. And I think it was a really nice kind of harmony and synergy between understanding cultural nuances as well. So here you see the work of a Lebanese fashion designer called Rabia Kairouz, who's a very well-established designer. He's a member of the Chambre syndicale. He established his atelier between Beirut and Paris. One of the things that's interesting with Rabia is that he set up a foundation in Beirut in 2008 called the Starch Foundation. And that was a foundation that he co-founded, which was really set up to try and mentor young Lebanese designers, really help them understand their audiences, mentor them, help train them, allow them an opportunity to show some of their products. At the time, I think it was very innovative. Now there are a greater amount of opportunities in the region for designers, such as the Vogue Arabia Prize and the most recent one, which is the Fashion Trust Arabia. But at the time, this was an individual effort that has really proven to be very successful and has seen generations now of Lebanese designers. This piece comes from his 2014 collection, the Barb Batroun collection, which really reinstates his interest in the cross-fertilization of cultures. So he was looking at the story of two cities here. Barb, which is a metro stop in the northeast corner of Paris, which largely serves a North African demographic and population. And Batroun, which is in Lebanon. It's one of the oldest cities in Lebanon. It's also become a very popular vacation spot. But it was also very nostalgic for Rabia because he spent his summer vacations in Batroun. So here he's really looking at the convergence of these cultures and taking elements like the Burnous woolen cloak, which is used by Berbers and Arabs across North Africa, but really refining it. This is one of the acquisitions of 3 that we acquired of the Turkish label Dice Kayak. Dice Kayak were the winners of the 2013 Jamil Prize, which is a biennial award run by the V&A for international contemporary artists and designers inspired by Islamic art. And the fashion house was set up by 2 Turkish sisters from Bursa. It really is founded around very structural principles and aesthetic. And with this collection specifically, which was very research-driven, they were looking, it was a collection of 26 dresses that looked at the architectural and artistic heritage of Turkey. So it paid homage to the Byzantine era, the Ottoman era, and really tried to uncover some of the layers of history. This particular one is called Kaftan. This work is by an Egyptian-Armenian artist called Shant Avedisian, who unfortunately passed away prematurely last year. He was a very prolific artist who worked across many different media, including costume design, video, photography, stencils. This was an important acquisition for the museum because the costume work that Shant did was was lesser known. He worked on this actually before his stencil work in the 80s. And unfortunately, even within Egypt, many people don't know about this period in time because he was quite a reclusive artist. At one period in time, he withdrew completely from the art world. With regards to Shant, he worked for about 10 years under someone called Hassan Fethi, who was a renowned Egyptian architect who really advocated the use of local materials and craftsmanship. So that really encouraged Shant to reconsider common materials, which he integrated into his practice, using cardboard on his stencils, but also using Egyptian damour, which is a local cotton, for his textiles work. So with regards to Shant, he traveled all across Asia, and I think an important point to mention here is that his travels across the Silk Road and across Asia and Central Asia and Japan and Korea, he fundamentally believed in the principle that boundaries and borders were irrelevant, and that ultimately a triangle is a triangle wherever you go, and that the basic cuts of traditional costume were the same despite the geography. So you can see here, this is a piece called Sederi vest, which has parallels between the kimono, the abaya, the kaftan. So there was a lot of parallels that can be seen in his work. This was an important acquisition in terms of trying to generate scholarship on a figure that has been written out of history. I think this is becoming an increasingly important discourse within institutions now. What does it mean to kind of decolonize an institution? And also, what does it mean to really write back into history figures who have been completely erased, and to draw more visibility. But also it was important in terms of drawing reference to some objects across the V&A's existing collection, both in terms of the Islamic collection, but also more widely. So it draws parallels here between some of the historic photographs of the Cresswell collection, as well as the examples of khayyamiyas, which are tent panels in the V&A's collection. This is the work of a Palestinian designer called Faisal Al-Malak, who was actually one of the participants of the training program that I mentioned. He's a designer that grew up between Canada and the Gulf, and his practice is very much based around reviving and bridging artisanal techniques across the region, the Arab world, with modern design. So this is a collection of his, which won the Vogue Arabia Award, and really revisits the use of the Yemeni futa, which is a type of Yemeni menswear. This is the work of Hala Keikso, a Bahraini designer who's based between Bahrain and London. Her practice is focused around workwear with an artistic twist, but her brand is focused very much around questions of sustainability. In fact, I first saw Hala's work at the British Council's Fashion Showcase, which, as I mentioned with Rahimur, is where I first saw your work as well. It's always been a point where I discover new designers. And I was very happy when she was selected to be part of the Jamil Prize. Her work is very interesting because she's really interested in questions around reuse and sustainable ways of clothes existing for lifetime. So she looks back at the use of salvage and workwear, but at the same time, she's also interested in cultural traditions like boro, the art of Japanese weaving and seaming textiles together. She's also very interested in her local environment. So she looks at local flora and fauna across Bahrain as a way of developing natural dyes. Her work, I should mention, and many of these other acquisitions were also considered when thinking about the reopening of Gallery 40. And so it fits into a much larger discourse around sustainability. What does it mean to actually have a brand guarantee for life? And the idea of passing things down from generation to generation. And the last designer I wanted to mention is a Jordanian designer called Nefsika Skurti, who studied at St. Martin's and then moved back to Amman to start her own women's wear with her sister Stephanie. Nefsika's work is very influenced by the socio-political realities in the region, but it's done in a very tongue-in-cheek, playful way. So this work, this look that we acquired, which is called Antiquity Jacket and Jeans, and it was the Dome of the Rock print, was where she was looking at popular tourist sites like Petra in Jordan and the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, and really thinking about how many of these, and also products and merchandise and souvenir shops and museums. And she was thinking about how you have states and countries that really look at marketing their own merchandise and assets, much like the fashion industry. So it has elements of kind of ruin lust and the idea of fetishization of states. And again, it parallels with many objects within the V&A's own collection. So just to end, I just wanted to say it was part of a much wider aim to try and globalize the V&A's collection, but again, to really integrate much of their work within it. And I think the starting point of these acquisitions was really them entering the collection, but the larger piece of work is yet to be done, which is really generating more scholarship, allowing artists and designers to come and really respond and interpret some of these collections and other objects within that, creating new narratives and stories within it. And in many cases of the designers that I mentioned, it was the first time that design or fashion design and design from these countries, Jordan, Palestine, Egypt, were entering the V&A's collection. So I think I'll end on that and just introduce you to Vicky.
I'm Vicky Ngari Wilson. So I started in the fashion industry, became a beauty queen, got thrown in international development, fell in love with it. That's what I wanted to do. Obviously go back home, help my people, got a bit fed up of white men in suits telling Africa what to do, and was like, look, we need to look at the creative economy. No offense to anyone, but let's be honest. And over here professionally, I worked for an organization that showed creative students how to implement social impact and sustainability into their ideas. So when this concept of sustainable fashion has been trending, I decided to look back at my people, my history, my heritage, looking at indigenous practices worldwide. So I started with Kenya, East Africa, and I truly believe craftsmanship is going to be the solution to stay sustainable. It's a tool for life, it's a tool for politics, it's a tool for education, and I will demonstrate it by these kyondos, which are Kenyan traditional basket, heritage basket from a people called the Kikuyu people, which is where I am from. And I will try to read, I wrote in pencil, but Dr. Joseph Wereru from the Department of Architecture described it as, a kyondo is a complex document that is written in an archaic, incomprehensible language that requires a complex, systematic decoding. You see, the kyondo's a very powerful symbol because the Kikuyus actually used to make their huts like this in a cone shape, and we see woven baskets everywhere during summer, and it drives me nuts. So it has spiritual significance because from the top of the navel, it represents spiritual realities meeting earthly realms at the bottom. It has social significance because men and women gathered around in the same way the spirals are woven, and they would slowly dance and rotate in the same way around a tree, which symbolized the access for humanity, for the world. And children would do the same. They would hold hands, and they would play and dance, and they will imitate the same spiral, constructing and deconstructing the woven basket, if you think about learning through play and how we can translate that over here. So it's made from a sisal plant, a really robust plant that needs no pesticides. The original color is cream. The young single mothers that I work with, I sent to their grandmothers to learn the ancient craft. And I gave them a challenge, and I said, remove all the synthetic materials that we're adding, no leather, everything, find a way to change the color. And they thought I was crazy. They thought, coming from England, I'm coming back to give them, you know, high fashion and what we're wearing. And they came back with a solution. This is the brown version, which is dyed completely using the bark of another tree. So they thought I was crazier, until I introduced them to the vegan fashion industry, which you might need to correct me with facts, I think was set to be 24 million in 2020 or something like that. Or the leather, I think the vegan leather fashion industry is set to be 85.5 billion in 2025. And there's another similar case with a fellow alumni of mine, and he's a young Nigerian farmer, really innovative, and he approached me, he said, I want to look at different value chains because I'm applying for funding in the UK. He grows cassava, and I was like, fashion? He was like, get out of here. And I'm like, okay. So when I said, what about your cassava waste? And he was like, no. Until I connected him with Leeds University and introduced him to the world of biodesign. I believe biodesign contributes about 220 billion to the UK economy, creating 5.2 million jobs. And at the moment, they're just looking at the bioscience and biotechnology in the areas of food security, health and well-being, energy production and environment, but not really exploring the creative economy. And fashion being 33 billion of the economy. So, I mean, if we really diversified biodesign, I really believe that we can triple that or double it, you know, from 220 to 480. My math is not great. But just from that angle, I think, you know, I really wish my mum was here to hear that, because you think it's tough, like convincing politicians and farmers to get into fashion, and African mother is something else. But I think the first policy that we need to really look at is distribution, to make it easy and affordable to import and export biosolutions, not just textiles, because that's what they are, because there's other things in other parts of the world. In India and Uganda, we have hyacinth, which is awful for agriculture. It's killing the environment. It's a weed. And communities around those rural areas are the only ones who understand how to work with it and craft with it. So that exchange is vital. And of course, that follows on to startup support, policies, obviously around, I think, I'm not sure if it's complete exact facts, but I was really shocked to find out that the synthetic bio sector has been growing really fast every 5 years, with around 150 startups between 2000 and 2016. And since then, since 2010, those startups have raised over 620 million in investment and 56 million in public funds leveraged more than 10 times from private investors for synthetic bio. I think the demand of more ethical and sustainable products, it's just not a good look, is it? And then IP, of course. We need to simplify intellectual property law to ignite more creative entrepreneurs. You know, heritage baskets like this have no business being manufactured by machines, and they have no business being misappropriated because it's decimating local women's jobs. It's horrible for the environment, and no one is supposed to be the same, these kiondos. If you look, like, it's like a social exchange in Kenya. It's like, what's yours? What's different about yours, you know? And that's been penetrated more with the ban of plastic bags. That bit we can copy. So, I mean, we're looking at 1 billion people, extra people, by 2030, if we really don't do something about the environment. And I think in Africa, they're saying it's like 6 babies to 1 family, and that's really due to lack of economic empowerment. So you can imagine how that's going to affect the rest of the world. If there's no jobs in Africa, where are they going to go? And I think the thread that really, for me, pulls it all together to start is education. You know, I began my career in crafting to heal my own trauma, which became a voice for activism, for the repatriation of artifacts that are in basements of museums and palaces. And if I didn't discover those, I wouldn't know my heritage, I wouldn't know what my ancestors have left me, we wouldn't know sustainable solutions that we don't need to recreate, we just need to go back to. So for me, education can tackle a few things, locally and globally. Locally, mental health, autism, community. 60% of employers in the UK wouldn't hire people with autism or feel uncomfortable because they don't know how to deal with it, or craftsmanship and igniting that industry. Autism thrive off repetition, and they're loyal because they don't want change. It doesn't work for them. You know, even down to things like getting the homeless to recycle. Again, this is Kenya, made from bottle tops. There's glass, recycled glass. There's solutions that are already existing. And globally as well, of course, the ban on plastic bags, but the skills exchange. You know, like, I would love to go to Uganda and sit with the communities and learn how to work with hyacinth. Or even fashion houses owning farms instead of factories. Or even diplomatic negotiations, conflict resolutions over crocheting, because you actually get to listen when you're crafting. And if we really want to take it local, I've been looking at what we have available here in the UK. We have things like the gum nut, which was used centuries ago to produce ink. And there's another grass, I've forgotten it, but it's in abundance in England. So thank you for listening to me. My project is basically curating indigenous communities and linking them to industry. So I'd appreciate any connections.
My name is Moses Kikin. So yeah, I'm an artist and I'm also a designer. So yeah, my presentation is basically about my spiritual practice within my creative practice and how that's my fueling force. So yeah, my dress is the piece in the middle there, and this piece is called the 10 Worlds. And in my Buddhist philosophy, which I practice, Nichiren Buddhism, by the way, the 10 worlds is basically all the different life states that are innate within all people, men and women, all the way from Buddha, all the way down to, you know, animality and hunger. And I wanted to create a piece that really represented all of those 10 worlds. But also, during that process of making this piece, I was really trying to connect with each individual fabric. So I wasn't just saying, oh, this looks cool. It was really about feeling the fabric and actually connecting with the mystic properties that it inherently has. A good example is at the front of this dress, you'll see that there's these beige stripes going down. And that's actually a fabric very similar to these bags, actually. It's raffia. And it came from a fabric called a kuba, which is a West African fabric from Benin. And at the time, I didn't know really much about that fabric, but I felt such a strong energy from the fabric that it was about being a protective force, you know? And I wanted to make a dress that was protective, you know? So I had the exhibition and I was exhibiting this piece. And during the exhibition, a West African diplomat came over to me and he was really excited. And I was like, what's up, you know? And he told me, he's like, that fabric, I'll tell you about that fabric. And I was like, please do. And I was a bit worried because, as I said, I didn't know too much about it. But he said, this fabric, the warriors in Benin, they would wear that before they go into battle because it protects them from the bullets and the arrows. And I thought to myself, well, I'll be damned, you know? Because for me, that's really what I was trying to come across with this fabric. It was meant to be a protective layer so that when a person does wear it, they are spiritually protected. So yeah, let me go through my slide, basically. This is the first time I'm actually really looking at my slide, so bear with me. So this dress here, this is called the voodoo dress. And I was commissioned to make this dress for a girl's 21st birthday. And during the process of making this, I'd never made a dress before up until that point. I trained with a costume designer, but he preferred to work on suits and very sort of, you know, turn-of-the-century suits for West End theatre, Wicked, to be exact. So when I was asked to make this dress, I was thinking, crap, I never made a dress. But I had this deep faith that, you know, I need to take this opportunity, actually. It was quite a lot of money involved as well. So I said, okay, I'll do it. I'll make something. And the criteria was savage beauty. You probably are aware of Alexander McQueen. And this girl was looking for a dress from the Savage Beauty collection, and I just kind of laughed at her. I was like, you'll never find one. You know, they're not really for sale in Alexander McQueen anymore. But I can make something like it, you know? So I did a drawing, and I drew this up. And she was like, I love it. I want it. Please, let's make it. And that was that moment where I was like, okay, the drawing was good, but, but what about actually doing it? So I started going around London, sourcing fabrics, looking through my mother's collection, because she's also a collector, you know, so she has a good inventory of great materials and fabrics. And bit by bit, we started to piece this dress together. And it was very ritualistic, making this dress, where really, when we would get to one stage in the making, we would kind of pause and be like, where do we go next? What's the next step? And then you just have to jump and have a leap of faith. And bit by bit, you know, at one point, it was coming to the day of the event, and the dress still wasn't finished. And I remember having like, I think I slept maybe about 10 hours that week. You know, it was quite ridiculous. But being in that sort of half awake, half asleep state, it's quite easy to hear voices and be like trusting, like, oh yeah, that sounds about right, you know, because you're so exhausted that you go with much more of instinct. And that started to awaken myself to listening to that sort of mystical side of creating, where I was like, what's that voice? Maybe I should go with it, you know? There's nothing really physical in front of me telling me I should use this fabric this way, but let me try it. And yeah, bit by bit, I was able to create works that actually haven't really been coming from my mind, but much more from a deeper, much more cosmic place. Okay, so let's look. So this piece here, this is called the Lotus Dragon. And yeah, in my Buddhist practice, again, I like talking about my Buddhist practice a lot. But the lotus is a very significant flower within the natural world, where basically it flowers and seeds at the same time. And that's meant to show the simultaneous of cause and effect. And because most flowers they either do one or the other, you know, so to have it both happening at the same time, it's the only plant that does it. So the lotus is right in the middle, very large, so that you could see it, because, yeah, cause and effect is fundamental in my practice. And that's the back of it. So I was using, again, very old fabrics. The dragons from a 1950s Chinese kimono, handmade embroidery. And also, if you look at the shoulders, the embroidery is from a Victorian piano shawl. And usually those two fabrics wouldn't sit together, you know, the kind of different places, different practices, different cultures. But it was through that dialogue with the fabric, that deep sort of intrinsic dialogue, I was able to find a meaning and a understanding between the two. This is just some up-close details of another jacket. This piece here, this is called the Sad Boy piece. And actually, I sold this piece to Domenico Dolce from Dolce & Gabbana. You know, what he does with it, I don't know, but hey. I called this piece the Sad Boy piece because, I mean, I didn't document it very well, but on the left side of the chest of this jacket, there's a leather carving that I made, and it's depicting a young soldier from World War I. And he got his hands in his head, you know, in his face, and he looks, you know, quite forlorn and sad. And I made this piece completely, again, it was an art project for me. I wanted to express my passion for, you know, opposing war right now, you know, because I feel like we live in such a sort of civilized time, but yet we are still practicing arts of killing each other, you know, and we're sending friends and families and, you know, everyone's kind of connected, and we're sending them out there to in effect end one's life, you know? And that for me was really why I made this piece, because I wanted to really express how much I was upset about that. So it is quite a beautiful statement, but at the same time, it's meant to be quite sad, you know, a bit like how heroic life can be, you know, it can seem quite epic and beautiful, but at the same time, it's quite sad. That's the back of another jacket that I made. I wouldn't go into too much detail about it, but basically, on the left side of it, you can see it's lighter, and then on the right side is a bit darker, and that's meant to represent the fading of night to day. And it being a three-dimensional piece or sculpture for me, it's kind of like that continuation, because you can walk around it and that continuous night and day would keep confronting you. This piece here is called Naushtan, and this was exhibited again in my exhibition earlier this year. And Naushtan is an Arabic word, and it's for the symbol of the cross that has the snake going around it. And you see that like usually outside of pharmacies. But the whole backstory of Naushtan, which I didn't know at the time of making this piece, was that God asked Moses to erect the Naushtan. And yeah, funny because my name is Moses, yeah. But yeah, this piece, yeah, so to erect the Naushtan, because for those that believe in God, they will be protected from the snake's venom. And I think that's why pharmacies adopted it, because it's kind of like chemicals and protection and venom and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so at the back, there's this cross that you could, it's quite abstract, but for me, it's there. And then on the top part of the shoulders, there's some python skin. So that's the Naushtan for me. So this is kind of my newer works, actually. I've started to shift between being an artist and a designer. So I've used the skills that I learned while being, training as a costume designer and doing my 3D sculptures, and I've decided to work on tapestries now. So this is a large cowhide that I've used very traditional techniques of like leather carving and dyeing and embellishment and embroidery to actually create a whole new narrative and a story. And again, while making this piece, it was much more of finding out about the piece while it was being made. It wasn't like I had the idea and I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do, It was much more about, oh, I feel like this fabric here or this embroidery needs to go in this part of the narrative. And bit by bit, it was kind of like watching a movie unfold before my very eyes, because I was like, ooh, this person's interacting with that thing. Wow, oh, okay. And then, after it took me about 1 complete month of solid work, but actually it was enjoyment, of solid enjoyment. I got to the place of creating this piece, which is called Hell is the Land of Tranquil Light. Yeah, no, I laugh too sometimes. Yeah, hell is the land of tranquil light. And people would usually say, what the hell does that mean? Well, some people get it straight away and they go, yes, yes, yes. But sometimes you get you get people being like, what is that? And for me, it was this experience that I had while being in the Caribbean, where my parents are from, and being on the beach and being very depressed while having like coconuts and palm trees all around me. And I was like, what? This is profoundly deep, because I could observe the fact that I was in a place which looks like paradise, basically. And inside me, I'm really depressed. And I wanted to really try and depict that space within this art piece where people would feel that, oh yeah, hell is not about where you are. It's really about how you are inside, internally. So these are closer up details. And if you look very carefully, I've even used film negatives to create the palm trees. And I don't know if you can see, but even in the bottom part of the film, there's Soviet tanks from 1970s Russia. And that's partly due to the fact that this film is from a 1970s Russian film. So it's really about kind of throwing the uncanny out there, where people would think, but what is a 1970s Soviet Russian tank doing in something that looks like, the Caribbean? And I was like, well, it's probably because there's connections there, Again, yes, so I've used snake skin, I've used embroidery, I've used the leather techniques. I've even used at the top of the tree, you'll see these 2 shiny things, which are meant to be coconuts, but they're actually made from tamarind fruit, so the seeds that are left in tamarind fruit. So again, repurposing things and not just throwing things to the bin, but actually finding a new world for them to live in. Yeah, so there you can see the film. Again, there's a silhouette of a Russian man. So yeah, this is the dress right there. So that's the 10 worlds. And I already explained it to you, I think. So yeah, that's some closer up details of the African fabric. And the reason why I put the tiger behind there in that way is usually, there was a moment where I could have chose to have the tiger out, being very prolific right in the front. But I thought to myself, yeah, in the jungle, tigers, they're not going to be standing all proud like that. They'll jump up on you on your back and just end you, So I was like, okay, let's have it hiding, hiding in the thicket behind what happens to be the warrior's fabric, the kuba. Again, that's just a close-up detail of the dress. And this is just a little fairly dark-skinned baby. But again, it was a found object. My mother found it, and I decided to dye it and make it. It was originally blonde like the hair, but I left the hair blonde. And yeah, again, to really kind of keep that contradiction going on. I'm not really trying to be pro this or pro that. It's really about finding a middle ground for everyone. And yeah, this is the Saha world, which translates into to bear or to endure. And if you look carefully, I think, yes, here, you can see that there's a person's hands in the air and another person laying down and another onlooker. And that was the place where I was at while making this piece. And I felt like I was, split into 3. One part of me was looking up into the universe, into the cosmos. Another part of me felt quite ill and defeated. And another part was just like looking on, just like, what's up? And I just felt naturally that's what I had to depict. And even if you look at the characters very closely, I don't know if it's clear here, but the hair that's used is actually my own hair. And that's very much of a ritual thing to do in voodoo or in other practices. And me using it was also to connect with my ancestors. Yes, got the time coming. I got to finish up. Yeah, so that's just more details, and yeah, this is the final piece of the exhibition, and that's called The Sacrifice. And I had to make sacrifices, you know, no parties, no drugs, you know, just let me get in my spiritual space and work and create. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Huge thank you to all of our speakers today. Fantastic stories. Thank you so much for coming in and speaking about your practice. We're going to open up to the floor now for some Q&A. So Marco, I've got microphone 6, so if that can come on, and we'll do roving mic. So have we got any questions from the audience, please? Yep, gentleman at the back.
I think good speeches, everybody. I think one thing I'd like to know is, like, I'm more of a technologist, so like I like fashion, but I like the history of technology and fashion. I think the speakers didn't really touch on like material sciences. Well, I know Vicky, you did a little bit. Like material sciences, the idea that like sometimes you must limit your art based on like the materials, your design process based on the materials that are around you, but also like the birth of like biomaterials and like reusing hemp and all these things would be quite interesting as like artists going forward.
I think one of the things when people talk about progression of textiles and I think fashion and technology is they always assume technology will always mean a machine. And I think, I think especially in fashion and textiles, the technology of textiles, and I think the future of textiles is actually, I kind of agree, I think it's going back to hand-making things, handcrafts, and looking at that, and then hopefully that doesn't get mass-produced and like become like a massive thing in like 20 years' time. But I think if we just keep to technology of pushing forward craft and looking at how far craft has come, and obviously a lot of it was kind of like left alone, is to pick it back up and then actually see how far we can progress with it, I think.
Do you mean you're more of a technology as in computers? Oh, that's...
I work with like lots of people. It's a thing that's come up a lot. It's like, how do we get like sustainable supply chains out there? Instead of just being like, we'll source locally, there are things we can use like technology for, like to create biodegradable materials. Like
Right here, right now. Are you talking about locally?
Like literally locally, like right now.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, I'm looking at some of this stuff in my studio, and I'm lucky enough to be around other biomaterial practices and just kind of like comparing what's happening like in Africa. But I mean, I think you just have to get out there, and I think in agriculture, conservation, go to Kew Gardens. I'm always in Kew Gardens. Yeah, and just trying to communicate that to scientists who are really open. Leeds University, I literally connected them with that Nigerian farmer. I was like, can you test out cassava? Because the only thing they're doing with cassava at the moment is, which is amazing, plastic bags, cassava waste, which disintegrate within minutes, which is incredible. But can we try and explore leather? It's great for them. That's what I would say, is just connect with institutions.
And I think another great institution to go to is the RCA. So the RCA is the Royal College of Arts, and it's right opposite Imperial, which is very much a science-based school. And a lot of the masters, they look at the technology of textiles, and actually the show that just happened, well, the season, a lot of it's all online. There's some amazing textiles coming out, but obviously none of it can get to a point where we can buy it. It's still in its very much development stages, but I would definitely look at the research that's been done.
Just also in answer to that question, I think one of the main things I address in my practice is actually the lack of us looking at the present, because as much as we're looking towards future technologies and developing things which in the future may be biodegradable or obviously are more sustainable in their creation, we also have to address the crisis which we currently have now. And, looking at future materials doesn't always address the present of things which we have in existence, which are currently affecting our climate, which are currently affecting pollution, which are, currently causing problems. There are so many factories that manufacture materials which go to waste. Fashion, as we've said a lot of positive points about it, but I think it's important that we are also very critical of it. And one of the biggest things we're responsible for is also producing waste in the manufacturing process. Fashion, as much as we also talk about it as an art form, and I think with a lot of us here as well, we're quite, young and emerging in our practice in some sense, which means that we have the luxury of being able to kind of really home in on designing sustainably, not just in terms of the clothing itself, but also in our practice, because we manage things, on a much more on a much smaller scale. But if you think about, big fashion houses, if you look at also, technology which we have now is also changing the way in which we communicate. So people want things quicker, people want things faster, people also want newness. There's this obsession with relevance, and we're no longer necessarily seeing, I think, on the one hand, we're here trying to create and honour craftsmanship and history, but we're also obsessed with relevance at the same time and newness. And so there has to be a balance. One of the things I do with my design is everything is completely sourced from dead stock. So, you've got luxury fashion houses who create lace, and the smallest effect would render, entire pieces useless. What happens to that? You've had fashion houses who are burning materials because they would rather, they'd rather sustain the view or the aesthetic of luxury than sell things at reduced prices in order to have that product out there. So it's great. I think it is incredible that we are looking towards the future, but it's important that we don't look so far into the future that we forget about things which exist now. And something as simple as upcycling. A lot of my pieces as well, they become art pieces too, so they can become tapestry pieces. They're multifunctional. Looking at kind of cyclical design processes, so the waste from one design can become, the base of another design, and that's not just with clothing; it's with textiles. It can also be, as you mentioned, with tech. It can be in car manufacturing. In so many different industries, we need to address those kind of creation models.
I just also wanted to draw attention. There's an initiative in the south of France called Atelier Luma, which very much tries to build on bringing together different disciplines. So you have engineers, designers, and artists working together to think about how to develop sustainable materials across the Mediterranean basin. There's a big project that they initiated looking at algae, and I know that's something that also relates to some of the previous artists in residence at the V&A, Julia Lohman, but they're really trying to, a lot of things have come out of it, including a brand that was set up in Sicily called Orange Fiber, which again looks at local resources and how they can be, developed and really thought out in a non-toxic way.
Great, there's a question at the back.
Hi. One of the things that I'd be interested to know your thoughts on, obviously everything you're doing is very commendable, and I think I'd probably be right saying the vast majority of people in here appreciate the time and money and care that goes into a lot of artisan craftsmanship and focusing on things like that and sustainability. But the wider customer, consumer, even though sustainability is something we're talking about, they're not prepared to spend often the costs involved with a lot of, I'm sure, the techniques involved with what you're using. So how do you think we can encourage consumers who in theory would like to be more sustainable, but actually aren't prepared to spend the money?
I think that's going to come down to government policy. I think it's going to be when they take up, unfortunately they didn't take up the 18 recommendations of the Environment Audit Committee, which was built up by Baroness Lola Young, who's worked on the sustainability and ethics in fashion, APPG, which wanted an amendment to Section 54 of the Modern Slavery Act, which would make it compulsory for all private and public sector organisations of over 35 million to state on their website or on their papers that they do not have modern-day slavery in the supply chain. And that can go down to any business. We had the CNA Foundation speak at the APPG, which we hosted meeting in December. The CNA Foundation highlighted that within every supply chain of every business, whether that's fast fashion, whether that's luxury fashion, there will be child labour, which is indentured labour, at the bottom of that supply chain. So until we get to a point where the government, we put a recommendation on our website for Fashion Roundtable of a letter that all of you can write to your MPs, asking them why they've not picked up, why the government chose not to pick up on the recommendations of the EAC. And I would suggest that you write that, because I think it's going to come down to policy. If you look at what the government did about plastic straws, that was an EU initiative. That was definitely seen as a win for DEFRA and for Gove, but that came from the EU. That's a very clear win. It was an easy win for them to say, look, we've banned plastic straws. The consumer is only going to decide to buy paper straws, or I've seen Claire Press showing that there was pasta straws at an event during Fashion Revolution Week, for instance, or no straw. I mean, maybe we could have no straw, but you know, the consumer's only going to buy what's available. So to put the onus on the consumer, I think personally the advocacy that we do, we say it has to go back to policy, because the consumer's already stretched. There's so many mixed messages. You've got organisations saying don't buy, do this, do that, and the consumer's overwhelmed by it. We're all consumers, we're all consuming all the time. And actually, for an industry, if we say don't buy, there goes the sector, and there goes the support for sustainable jobs and for sustainability within supply chains. So I think it comes down to lobbying, which is why it was fantastic. Even though Kelly couldn't be here, email her. She's the head of small businesses. Fashion in the UK is made up of small businesses. There's something like 57,000. You know, many of you will be in what's regarded as an SME. That's her remit. You know, Dame Eleanor Laing being here, Tristan was a politician. So lobby these people, advocate for that. That's why he's taken up the work of working on design whilst he's here, because he realises that if we don't train people here in the UK, we're going to have a problem, and we already are seeing that in what's being turned out from education. So I think it's down to advocacy and policy.
I think also, just to add, to bring the appreciation of craftsmanship is education. Mm-hmm. I did a workshop with kids on a big red bus. It was so cool. The kids came on board, and there was this young boy came on. He was such a little rude boy. He was a cool kid. He was like, I wear Prada, I wear Gucci. I was like, yeah. And I was like, so what I got them to do is use my offcuts and to create like a T-shirt tapestry where they could take home, and about the environment. So the other thing about craftsmanship is the materials are really expensive to buy. So that's why it's really expensive, but just turning it on his head and using recycled stuff and starting from education so it can go out and appreciate from consumers, from young kids to their families.
I also wanted to say as well, in terms of the consumer, there needs to be a social re-education as well, to be quite honest with you. Dresses don't cost £5. They just don't, you know. The fast fashion has killed everyone's understanding of exactly what goes into making clothes and exactly the value of clothing, you know, and it's a real problem, because everyone now is like, yeah, but it's only I can get a pair of jeans for £5 or something like that. And no, actually you can't, because tomorrow's quite right. Someone is suffering at some end of the supply chain, and there needs to be a social education really around that. So again, not to kind of put the onus on the consumer, but I think we all need to really understand what goes into making our clothes.
I also want to add to when I was training with the tailor/costume designer, he'd always make this remark. He'd be like, people are foolish, you know, they'll spend like £400 on a suit. You know, why don't they just get a proper good tailored suit with some good materials, spend £1,000, and that suit could last them a good few decades, you know, rather than spending £400 every 1 year or 2 years or whatever. And he also went on to say that, you know, with a proper tailored suit, it's for you, and it's also easier to repair, you know, so if it does get a rip in it or something like that, he's very capable and apt in fixing those things and making you look good for a much longer period of time for a lot less money. But it's, I guess, again, education, people knowing that's actually a viable way to buy.
Also, designers and brands, we have a responsibility because we create value. So customers' demand comes from what they see as valuable, whether it's because of relevance. So again, social media is the biggest one. If you see enough influencers or enough of the right people wearing the right thing, that mentally creates a demand for it. Again, I think, you know, you mentioned people aren't prepared to spend this much, but actually they are on the right thing. So, you know, when you go into Primark, you are less likely to be prepared to spend £200. But if you were walking into Harrods or Liberty, that £200 now has a very different meaning in that context. So, you know, when you look at luxury brands, if we're very honest about it, a lot of them are outsourcing their production. So, you know, the value's not necessarily coming from heritage and craftsmanship anymore. It's coming from the association with a name, which was once associated with that heritage. And so, again, I agree with all the points because it is social re-education, but it also does come down to what Tamara said, where it is about policy, because, you know, now we're talking about capitalism, we're talking about profit, and, you know, we're talking about sustainability and value, but also profit. And if we've changed the way in which we communicate and we've created this element of demand, essentially we've created a monster which we also have a responsibility to combat. And it means people making sacrifices. It means, in many cases, profit margins dropping because we're not relying on child labour and we're not relying on unethically outsourcing production. And unfortunately, a lot of brands were around at a time where those, you know, a lot of these things aren't new. You've had people lobbying for this for years and years and years, and only now when we've got kind of this frenzy of an impending climate crisis or, you know, social crisis, that people are caring about it, and it has to come from being enforced. So I think government and policy is really important in that.
Hi, I'm Veronique, and I have a question maybe for Teleica. Aren't you afraid that your initiative might lead to a cultural/heritage plundering?
Cultural heritage plundering? No, I'm not afraid of that. And I'll tell you why. Because to be afraid of cultural heritage plundering would suggest that I haven't done any preamble with my own students about cultural plundering. So all of my work is about how cultural plundering has happened to the point where people are not being able to, or people have not recognized their own value. And so with the exchange that we're doing, I'm asking students from the UK to find out about themselves before they go and try and find out about someone else. And then I'm asking students in the Bahamas to find out about themselves, which the students that I've spoken to they're not interested in sustainability and all that, I told you, but that's your heritage. So find out about yourself before you try and get together with something else. And so we talk a lot about cultural appropriation, we talk a lot about cultural appreciation and what those two things mean. And so it's not really about I'm taking from someone else, or one group of students is taking from someone else to make something that's going to invigorate and boost themselves. It's about two people who understand themselves, two groups of people who understand themselves implicitly, working together to create something new. And that's kind of why I'm not afraid of the cultural plundering, because I drill it into these kids. Know yourself before, you know, you try and do anything else. We've got value, you know, everyone's got value. And I think that what happens, because I would do a lot of work in the Caribbean, and what happens with a lot of young people is that they look on Instagram and Snap and all of those other things, and they project outwards instead of seeing what they've got literally at their feet, right? And what will happen is that somebody will, usually European, no offense, but it's true, usually European will be like, oh, that's nice, I'll take that and I'll make something out of it, and then they'll make billions, right? And then there'll be something on Instagram or Facebook in a few years that will be like, oh my God, these people have taken this thing. Well, actually, know yourself first. Know yourself first and value yourself first, and then do something with it. So that's kind of my rhetoric on that. So that's why I'm not really, yeah, you need to come to my class. Then you wouldn't ask me that question.
Everyone else? Hi. Oh, we've got time for one more, and then we'll wrap. There you go.
Hi. Just to back up what the last speaker just said, it's very, very important to understand that UK is highly cosmopolitan now, and however, we cannot hide away from the rich heritage that we have. And where the big winner is taking the upper hand is very unfair, because really, I remember at some point I was doing fashion design here as well, and it was interesting. My last project was on Mark and Spencer, and I was shocked just a day before I was going to submit about it being a caring company and all that. Wow, the headline, Mark and Spencer caught in the sweat house with children, and that was saddening. And I think that brought the crashing of Mark and Spencer price line, which really, are we really paying value for what we are getting? Because like what we enjoy, the lower prices we are prepared to pay is costing life. It's other people had the deprivation of it. Some people are paying the price that we are not prepared to pay. And really, it's all about re-educating and creating awareness. Creativity is no longer even in schools, in primary schools. I mean, children are far away from reality. And with the way the social media is going on, it's disturbing. We are creating unrealistic expectation for our coming generation. And if it is not addressed now, we are leaving chaos behind. So we are all equally responsible, and also with the government. It's about lobbying. I mean, this has been ongoing for a long time. It hasn't just started. So if for the past 25 years I realized that, and we are still talking about it, I think it's about to have a massive movement to say to our government, you need to listen. People don't need handouts. They just need a helping hand, because we can all cohabit. People don't need to come and flood the UK with immigration for economy, because from wherever they are, the world can benefit from each other if we can only be true to ourselves.
Thank you very much for that. I'd like to introduce Edwina Ehrman, who's a Senior Curator of Fashion here at the V&A, and Edwina is going to provide us with a few closing remarks. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Leanne. So I dread being asked to do this. I always find it really, really difficult because we've heard so much this morning. It's been incredibly stimulating, thought-provoking. And we'll all come away with something different, I think, when we leave and when we reflect on what we've heard this morning. But I think for me, really two things came out. One was the critical importance of communication, collaboration, developing and sustaining networks, wherever they might be, local, global, and being open and listening and giving others a voice, and the power of narrative and stories to frame and articulate feelings that many of us share, emotions, beliefs, questions. Stories and narratives are very powerful things which we deal with a lot in museums, we try to anyway. And I think that came across very much in this discussion. And the other thing that really intrigued me, and I think there is a policy role for this, is several people mentioned the importance of local support systems, of youth organisations, to stop people falling through the gaps, to really help them articulate and understand what they want to do, what they're good at. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think that's somewhere where government, perhaps private organisations could help with that. And I do think, I agree with Tolu, it's such a shame that there are plenty of mentoring opportunities out there, volunteering opportunities, but so many people can't afford to do that. And I think that's another thing we really need to address. It's very important because, as somebody said, most people around this table are in the beginning of their career, and what we really want to help are them and the next generation, because they are so important. And education and mentoring took us really beyond the local to the global, to a real spirit of reaching out to the world, perhaps to where people's families originally lived, but beyond that too. And to how important an exchange of ideas, experience and skills is. We've heard about social action projects, we've heard about education in that context. So I think all these things are very, very important. I've become extremely interested and passionate about sustainability in the fashion industry. And for me, it's very heartening to have such a big discussion about that at the very end of the morning. But I wholeheartedly endorse what Tamara said. We have a role to play as well. We should be writing to our MPs. We have a fantastic fashion college in this country, fashion graduates who go around the world and have huge influence. We should be setting Britain up as a standard bearer for sustainability. So write to your MPs. Sadly, they're not here to hear us say that, but I know they will be receptive. It's part of their job to be receptive, as Dame Eleanor said at the beginning. And I'd like to end by thanking Tamara and Leanne for organising such a fantastic event, and to all our panellists who've been absolutely fantastic. It's been an amazing morning. And for all of us working in museums, which I'm not going to dwell on too much, these events give us such food for thought. They are so important, and we want to keep in touch with you and continue these conversations. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for being a good audience and asking great questions too.
Thank you, Edwina. Just to say as well, we have Abby Nerona from the Royal School of Needlework, whose work is here, so please do come to the stage. And Abby, can you put your hand up? Fantastic. She's in the audience. Thank you. Thanks.